Awesome, awesome, awesome. I just want to encourage you, if you've been hearing what is baptism and been walking through baptism and you feel that nudge about learning more about it or taking that step, I encourage you to join the Family Life team at the elevator, and they'll walk you they won't walk you, you'll take the elevator up to the fourth floor to our What is Baptism class. My name is Anthony. For those of you who don't know me, I'm very excited to be here today. I figured Pastor Chris gets to enjoy the bench. It's my turn. I'm very, very excited today because we have somebody here that is help leading one of the organizations that we partner with. And we have been partnering with this organization now for a number of years. In fact, it was one of our first partners here at Hoboken Grace. And I've been very fortunate to be able to watch this organization grow and develop. For the past 5 years, I've been able to go out to Seoul, South Korea with the team as we see the amazing work that Liberty in North Korea, or LINK, is doing out there. And as you'll see today, they have offices all over the world, and they're doing some pretty incredible things. And I'm excited to welcome President and CEO Hannah Song. So you give a big round of applause. All right. Welcome to Hoboken Central Park.
Thank you for having me here. It's nice and cozy.
Absolutely. Sharing a bench. So Hannah, I know there are some people that may not know what Liberty North Korea does, what LINK does, and also your role in the organization. So maybe you could just help us to understand a little bit more about LINK.
Sure. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me here today. It's just such an honor. We are so grateful for this relationship and this partnership we have with Hoboken Grace. It's been a number of years, and we love having the team out in South Korea with us, and it means so much not just to us, but to our North Korean friends also. They wonder, who are these random people from halfway around the world that usually aren't even Korean, and why do they care about us? And so it's super awesome to be back and to just be able to share more about what we're doing. So for those of you who don't know much about Liberty in North Korea, we're an international NGO. We are focused 100% on the North Korean people, which is a little bit different than what we are more familiar with because of what we hear in the news day in and day out, especially as of late. Our organization, we work in two main areas. So the first is working with North Korean refugees, because those are the people that we can reach. Today, North Koreans leave, they escape their country every year, thousands of them. And the problem is once they get into China, it is illegal for them to be there because the Chinese government refuses to recognize them as refugees. Instead, they actually cooperate with the North Korean government. They will find and arrest them and forcibly send them back. A lot of North Korean women in China, because of their vulnerable status, they end up being trafficked as well and sold to Chinese men, sometimes multiple times. And so our work really begins in China. We help and find these North Korean refugees, and then we help them to escape through a 3,000-mile modern-day underground railroad all the way to Southeast Asia. It's there in Southeast Asia that we cooperate with the local government and can get them to resettlement in the United States or to South Korea. And the second part of the work that we do is called changing the narrative, and I think it's pretty clear why we do that. Most of us here are probably more familiar with the high politics narrative on North Korea. Kim Jong-un, nuclear weapons, his crazy haircuts, Dennis Rodman. Those are most of the stories that we hear, and that's what the news tends to like to focus on. But there's this whole other side of the story, 24 million North Korean people that live in that country. And sometimes I think we forget that the North Korean people are not the regime. And these people inside of that country are just like us. You know, they are families that have kids that want a better future, that want to find a way out of that country, or that want to be able to find a way to survive inside North Korea. And so what we try to do is really tell the stories of the North Korean people, and then let people know there is something we can do. It's not an impossible issue. And so, you know, we've been doing this work for quite some time, and we're so grateful. The only way we've made it this far has been because of incredible partnerships and support from folks like you here and our relationship with Hoboken Grace.
Awesome, awesome. So tell us a little bit about what you're excited about, what you're working on now, and then, of course, I'm sure a lot of us want to know what we can do, how we can get involved.
Yeah, so I will say this year, what we're really excited about, probably two things I'll share. One is we recently just surpassed a pretty big milestone. We have rescued over 700 North Korean refugees, and so that's been a really exciting thing. Thank you. And I think that's really exciting for us, obviously not just because these are like 700 people, but I think because of this idea that it's not just this one individual, but we'll never really know the impact that we can have on generations to come because of this one individual that was brave enough to risk their life to leave their country and to begin this whole new life. The other area that we're really excited about is that this year we're finally starting to bring the issue of the trafficking of North Korean women more to the forefront. There is a real crisis of trafficking happening globally and even here in our country, but North Korean women have been missing from this story as well. And as I had mentioned, because of their vulnerable status in China, so many of these women end up being trafficked. China's one-child policy has created this dearth of women in China, which means there is a huge demand for women. And so many of the women that we've been fortunate to rescue and to bring through have sometimes been forced into these situations, have been willingly sold because it's a better life, have been sold repeatedly. And they just face these near impossible decisions of, do I leave behind this child in China or pursue freedom by escaping and getting out? And so we just launched a campaign. If you go to sleepwellmybaby.com, that is our most recent campaign, and it's a really strong piece of media that we've just made to accompany that. I think the easiest thing you can do is to just watch it and to share it. We really hope that this campaign, this story, can reach a lot of people that don't yet know about what's happening to these North Korean women. And so if you can go to sleepwellmybaby.com and check that out, we would be so grateful. And there's other things you can do as well, tons of things. Would love to talk to you more. I'll be outside. But there are ways that we can actually help individuals to escape. It costs $3,000 to rescue one person, something that a lot of the gifts here from Hoboken Grace have provided to help us to enable rescues. And even just helping us to change the narrative on North Korea. It's one of the easiest things that we can be doing, that we need more help trying to combat this alternative narrative that's in the media that focuses a lot on the politics.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one of the things that we had talked about, and this question, kind of leads in today's conversation, but has there been a time in your story or in the stories of those that you've seen that you just saw these insurmountable odds, it felt like the deck was stacked against you, and yet somehow you saw God just demonstrate his faithfulness throughout it?
I think with North Korea, it is an issue that sometimes that is exactly what describes that. People hear North Korea and they run for the hills. It's scary, it's intimidating, it's nuclear weapons, are we gonna go to war, are they gonna bomb us? But again, I think more specifically for us, it's really this opportunity that we had to work in the Underground Railroad. And so I think we came upon that challenge when we started our rescue program. And in 2009, a good friend of mine was doing research for a very prominent human rights organization. She was spending a lot of time in the border area of North Korea, China, interviewing women, and also in South Korea. And she wanted to learn about their stories. How were they being trafficked? Why? How old were they? How much were they being bought for? But one of the things that kept coming up that she didn't expect was, okay, I know they risk their lives leaving North Korea and it's really dangerous. They get to China and they're being trafficked there. But she didn't know that as these women were making their way out through the underground in Southeast Asia, relying on people to help them through, that they were continuously exploited. And there was a case that popped up in multiple different stories from women saying that there was an individual that was actually posing as a missionary in Southeast Asia, pretending to help these women, but would bring them through and would steal their money and rape them. And I remember hearing that, and I was so angry. I mean, I wanted to punch a wall angry. And mostly because you feel so helpless. It's hard to hear that and then to walk away and be like, okay, there's nothing I can do about that. And so it was on that trip that my colleagues and we went to a bar and we sat there that night and we were like, we're not leaving here until we figure out what can we do. And so we came up with 100 ideas, and over the course of the year, we sought partnerships, relationships. We tried to learn as much as we could. I mean, none of us have any business doing this work to begin with. It's North Korea. But on top of that, it's not like we knew how to operate in an underground railroad or how to help people successfully escape from these countries. But it was one of these things where it was not just of us. We did everything we could that we knew was within our control, and then after a certain point, we had to just let go and just trust that we were invited into something that was so much bigger than us. And all we could do was to just be faithful up until that point. And a year later, we launched our refugee rescue program, and I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why we are so grateful every time we complete a rescue mission. And we've done so many of them, because there are so many risks that are involved every time. It's a humbling reminder that, fortunately for us, a lot of them have been successful, but there are times when our groups don't make it, and they get caught, and they get sent back. And that's just the reality that we face in this issue. But we have to hold fast to the fact that, we just have to be faithful with what we're doing and do the absolute best that we can and keep trying to do that better and just trust that everything else is in his control.
Absolutely. You're going to be able to speak with Hannah and talk with her, and there's some literature out in the lobby, and learn about how you can get involved and learn about their work, and go to their website and read these stories and listen to these stories. Most of these people that I've gotten a chance to meet and spend time with, and really just not only am I inspired, but just to see how God is working all over the world. So would you join me in praying for Hannah and the organization? Father, thank you for what you are doing. I think the most amazing thing about what we're hearing and what we're seeing is that how you are at work all over the world. And there are things that we may not see happening, but that you are constantly working. And I just want to specifically pray for Hannah and her team and the interns and the staff that are so tirelessly working for this issue that you have just pressed upon their heart. I pray that they will find rest, but that they will also find strength and wisdom and guidance throughout this whole process, and protection, of course, all those people that they are working with and hoping to get out. And she's absolutely right. The impact that we have been able to see as you work through these people for generations to come is immeasurable, and for that we are alone grateful. Thank you for having them here today. Thank you for allowing us to partner with them, and we can't wait to see how you're going to work, and it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Would you celebrate Hannah again for me? Thank you. Awesome. Man, I might be a little bit biased because I have seen the work firsthand, what they have done out there in the Seoul office, and gotten to spend time with some of them. And there are going to be some cards, and you're going to see their stories, and the teams that we've brought out there have actually gotten to spend time with them and learn their stories, and they're all incredible. And I just want to encourage you to see how you can get involved and hear more about how God is working over there as well. So for those of you who've been with us for the past few weeks, you know that we're in a series called Rest, which is why we're out here in the park. But Pastor Chris is gone, so we're going to give the Rest series a rest, and we're going to take a little bit of a break. Mostly not because for any purpose, but we want to give you a preview, if you will. A teaser trailer of our fall series, and my wife and I are both big fans of previews. We sit and we'll watch IMDb trailers forever, and it's the little things that keep a couple together. But this fall, we're going to be working through a series that's called Heroes, and our goal is to take lessons from those who've come before us and learn from them. And so this got me excited and to do some research, and I love the dictionary. It's a little weird, but I love looking at up definitions, and so I decided, okay, well, what does the dictionary define a hero? And here are the definitions. Number one, a hero is a person who is admired for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. A hero is also the chief male character in a book, play, or movie who is typically identified with good qualities and with whom the reader is expected to sympathize. A hero is a person, character with superhuman abilities, or my personal favorite definition, another term for a submarine sandwich. So that's the hero I'm talking about today. I'm just kidding. I don't know. There's something about the word hero. I can honestly say to you all that I've always wanted to be a hero. And I grew up having a favorite hero when I was a kid, a hero that I just wanted to be just like. And the hero of my childhood was Indiana Jones. I used to take my dad's belt and whip everything in sight. Man, I wanted to be him. I wanted to be like Indiana Jones. I used to have the kids on the playground recreate the scenes I even had a kid pretend to be the big ball. That was hysterical. But I just wanted to grow up, and I wanted to be like Indiana Jones until when I grew up, I realized that that's not what archaeologists do at all. But I still love the movies. And I think secretly we all can identify with that. I think secretly inside of us, we all want to be the hero. And I believe it's ingrained in us. There's so many superhero movies and stories, and we love watching the news or whatever when the good guy wins or the rescue happens, and it's this hero story is really the archetype pretty much of every story that we find ourselves in. There's this story, something goes wrong, and then at the right moment, which seems like the last possible moment, the hero swoops in and makes everything right, and life is found again. And it's a structure of a story that we really resonate with, and it's a story we love to hear over and over and over again because it's part of who we are. And yet, somewhere along the line, we stop dreaming. We stop believing that we could be heroes. We resign to the fact that we may never be Indiana Jones. And so we look at others and say, well, I guess that's not for me. And I think we all have heroes in our own life, people that we would call heroes. This past Tuesday, I was in Colorado at my grandfather's funeral, and he was one of my heroes. He was a Korean War veteran. In fact, as I was talking with Hannah, and it's really one of the reasons I had a heart for the Korean issue, and because my grandfather would tell me stories and stories and stories about his time over there in Korea. He was a hard worker. He was a man who faced incredible challenges growing up, poverty, racism, and many times he just had the deck stacked against him, but he persevered. And one thing I remember about my grandfather is that he was a man of wonderful faith. And the priest who got up and spoke at his funeral even identified him as a man of faith. And my cousin who was giving the eulogy talked to him that he was a man who never lost faith. And towards the end of his life, it was rough for him. He had this crippling arthritis that he couldn't even walk from. And almost a year ago to the date, he lost his beloved wife of 62 years to cancer. And yet he always had this incredible faith in God. In fact, he used to have my aunt or cousins go and bring him communion every single week. And towards the end of his life, he just had so many things that had this unwavering faith that got me thinking, okay, well, we know what the world and we know what the dictionary defines as a hero, but what about God? What does God say is the definition of a hero? And how should we interact with him? Is this, are we supposed to look up to them, or emulate them? How do we interact with a hero? And as Pastor Chris and I were working through this, we were brought to a verse that's found in Hebrews. We're back to actually a couple chapters in Hebrews 11 and 12. And in it, the writer of Hebrews talks about these people that are kind of in the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Faith, if you will, these faith heroes. And the book of Hebrews is found in the New Testament. It's a book that's written, it's a letter that's written to a church that had been actually planted. They're called like second generation Christians, which means that this wasn't planted by necessarily one of Jesus's apostles, but somebody that the apostles had trained. And this was a church that was thriving, but that had a lot of persecution. And so they were going through a lot, but this letter, which, the authorship is up for debate, but it doesn't take away from the importance of this letter. And in this chapter that's famously known as the Hall of Fame, we started to see these names of all of these people that had come before us. And what we're hoping to look at this fall is we're going to look at the lives of many people who are standing in the Hall of Fame. And the world's going to know their name. I had to. But today, I want to take us to this passage that specifically talks about why they're considered heroes of faith. And I think in order to do that, we need to kind of define what it means to have faith. And Hebrews 11, 1 through 3 really gives us a good definition, kind of God's definition of what it means to have faith. And it's found in Hebrews 11, 1 through 3. It says, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. And so God's definition of faith is the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Romans 8 defines hope as a desire with expectation. Hope is desire with expectation. And so there must be some basis or reason to expect a desire to be realized, and this basis is faith. Then the rest of Hebrews 11 is this list of people who were famous for their faith and reasons why. People like Abel and Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, the list goes on. And these were people, ordinary, everyday people, just like you and me, but people that God used. And our series verse, the series verse for heroes, comes from Hebrews 12:1, which just after comes the list of all these heroes of faith. And the writer of Hebrews was done talking about them. He says in 12:1, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. I was actually looking at a couple of different translations for this verse, and I really love the way the New Century Version puts it. It says, we are surrounded by a great cloud of people whose lives tell us what faith means. So here he's listing all these people with faith, and he says that we're just surrounded by these people whose life tells us what faith means. So let us run the race that is before us and never give up. We should remove from our lives anything that would get in the way and the sin that so easily holds us back. In short, this Hall of Fame is a list of people who faced these incredible odds for God. It's a list of people who are willing to take tremendous and sometimes terrifying risks for God. It's a list of people who were given tasks which I think in our human terms may seem impossible. And that's why the writer is saying that these are the heroes of faith. And I think he wants us to look at this verse and not be intimidated, but to be inspired, to give a real sense of courage and a renewed sense of responsibility by making these heroes remember all of those people who came before them. And in a few weeks, as we continue this hero series, we're going to be looking at all the characteristics of these normal, everyday humans who trusted God in a big way and thus became the heroes of faith. One of the ones that he mentions is one of my favorite stories from the Old Testament. It's a documentation of the life of Joseph. You know, he's the one that had the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And in his story, he is mentioned, specifically in Hebrews 11, he is mentioned as one of the heroes of faith. And it's a story that we sometimes fail to see the significance of it. And the story of Joseph, the name Joseph actually means dreamer. And you can see his entire story in Genesis. It's found in Genesis 37 through 49. And his father, who is also mentioned as a hero of faith, is Jacob, who we did the fight series on last summer. And early on, though, in Joseph's life, he faced some incredible challenges. He faced adversity. His brothers were not a big fan of him. In fact, it says so this way in Genesis 37:4. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. I mean, it got so bad that they eventually rejected him and completely sold him into slavery. It says in 37:26 through 27, Judah was one of his brothers. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders." So they sold him for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him off to Egypt. Then once he's in Egypt, he's sold again to a guy named Potiphar. And Potiphar realizes there's something about him. Again, God is working in Joseph's life. And Potiphar makes him head of the household. And so he's kind of ahead of all the servants in the household. But Potiphar's wife finds Joseph a little attractive, and so she wants to try to get him to go to bed with her, and he refuses, and he actually runs away, and she holds on to his cloak, and she makes up this story to her husband to say, "Hey, look, this Hebrew slave that you brought us just tried to take advantage of me, and look, I have his cloak here to prove it." And so Potiphar just, was so furious that it says in Genesis 39:19, Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And you read the story, and there's other instances that come up where it seems like just Joseph cannot catch a break. He spent many years in prison until this false accusation was exposed. And while in prison, though, through dreams and wisdom of God, Joseph was ultimately raised to be second in command only under Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And although he had these rejection and lies and false accusations and was cast into prison, the one thing that you see throughout his story is that Joseph never lost hope. And Moses, the writer of Genesis, consistently puts this one phrase throughout the story of Joseph's life. And it's this one phrase that you could even find in the passage that I just read. It says, "But the Lord was with Joseph." And it constantly comes up throughout the entire narrative of Joseph's life. But the Lord was with Joseph. And despite all that he was going through, the Lord was with Joseph. And one of the things I see in Joseph's story is that Joseph, he didn't let circumstances rob him of the role that he was playing in God's story. And I think one of the things that we need to realize when we look at the life of Joseph or any of these heroes of faith is that when we walk into this relationship with Christ, we too enter into God's narrative. We have a role in God's story. And if he's teaching Joseph to not let the circumstances rob him of the role that he was playing in this story, the same is true for us. That God is calling us to not let the circumstances rob us of the role that we are to play in God's story. We should see in the life of, and what I'm hoping that we're going to see in the lives of these heroes of faith that come before us is that God uses ordinary, everyday people to change the lives of many. To the heroes who've come before. And despite overwhelming difficulties, Joseph ended up saving Canaan and Egypt and his family from the severe famine of 7 years. Joseph's story is the story of a man whose faith, and he never stopped believing that God was for him. In fact, his name is mentioned 246 times in the Bible. It's amazing what you can find on Google. But that just goes to show you that we're here today even telling his story about the incredible faith he had. I mean, it is recounted again in the book of Psalms. They talk about Joseph. Just before Stephen is martyred in the book of Acts, he recounts the story of Joseph. Joseph is a hero of faith because he models for us a firm faith in God in the face of adversity. I mean, just before he dies, he reassures his brothers in Genesis 50:20. He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people." It's crazy to think about that what you've gone through or what you are going through could have a generational effect. And yes, there is the possibility that God is using what you're going through or have gone through to strengthen your faith. But there's also, you never know that what you're going through could also strengthen the faith of those in your path. Everything that happened to Joseph that was against him or seemed evidence of any type of hope that was lost, Joseph still always believed and held on to the hope that God was for him. And Joseph concluded that God had been in charge at all times. Nothing had happened to him that was apart from God's permissive will. God permitted these situations in Joseph's life, and yet Scripture tells us that Joseph trusted the Lord continually. There's a famous phrase that we use in life, not realizing that it comes from the Scriptures. You may have said the phrase yourself, I hope against hope. It's actually found in Romans 4:18. Against hope, believe in hope. He knew that God had allowed these difficult circumstances to work in his life. In fact, Joseph acknowledges 4 times in this passage that it was God who was in control. And listen, the truth of the matter is that God doesn't promise a life that's going to be comfortable and pleasant. And what happened to Joseph from our perspective wasn't good. I mean, he spent 14 years in prison. And yet, God used all these bad situations to accomplish his good purpose in Joseph's life. Throughout his trials, Joseph was learning to trust God. Because he had no control over what was happening. He came to understand what it meant to be desperately dependent on God. And Joseph learned to trust God in all circumstances. And that God was doing the work of conforming his life to look like Christ's. And listen, I'm sure that if we were to think of all the ways of getting to know God, that tough circumstances wouldn't necessarily make the top of our list. We often don't like the plan that he uses if it includes struggles or pain. And going back to our verse for the hero series that's found in Hebrews 12:1, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. In exactly 28 days, I am set to run the New York City Marathon. I said I'm set to run it. I didn't say I was set to finish it. But this passage speaks to me so much more now that I'm a runner, because when you train for a long run, you must run a long distance in order to train your body. And a couple of years ago when I started running, I thought it was a monumental success that I hit 1 mile. If you had told me, a few years ago that I'd be running 26.2 miles, I'd have said, you're lying. I said, I could never do that. But through persistence and training, I much like trainers who run for a race, God is training us as well. And sometimes training, just like in marathon training, there's pain. Ask my wife. Sometimes after a long distance run, I will come back, I will sit down, and then I will go up to go to the bathroom, and it'll take me 30 minutes to get there. Because I cannot walk. But my body is being strengthened to be able to run this race well. And that's what God is trying to get us to understand here. And, we live in a society that says pain is bad and cannot come from God. And yet we should only see the tremendous pain that Christ endured on the cross to see that God can use pain for good. The book of Hebrews even says in chapter 5, verse 8, although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. We should only consider the tremendous pain that Christ endured on the cross, that God could use pain for good. And his pain, Christ's pain, was necessary for our redemption. And sometimes pain is necessary in our redemption story as well. The thing I love about this Faith series is that Jesus is woven into all of these stories of all the heroes that we're going to walk through, and all the stories and the heroes of faith. You can everything mirrors something in the life of Jesus. You could probably call him the hero of heroes. And like Joseph, we understand that difficult and unfair things have happened to most of us. People have hurt us. People have sinned against us. And listen, if you are struggling with difficult circumstances from your past, or do not understand the trials that you're going through, remember that everything that happens to you is filtered through God's goodness and his love. He uses everything, including pain, to accomplish his purpose of producing his likeness in your life. And one of the questions I think we're answering, that God is asking us as we look at the heroes of faith, and specifically as we look in the life of Joseph, God is saying, are you going to let the circumstances you're in rob you of your role in my story? When we look at Joseph's life, we see that he moved from strength to an even greater strength, and that each thing of adversity just in some way prepared him for the leadership role that he was going to assume eventually. Joseph didn't bow to defeat. In fact, those who sought to defeat Joseph ended up bowing to him. And when you walk into this relationship with Jesus Christ, any adversity that you experience is subject to his power and his grace. And here's the thing, is that he never stops being in charge of your life. He never loses authority over you or the circumstances that affect you. God is always in control, and he uses adversity to fulfill his purpose in you. Joseph trusted God and played his part well in God's story. And if we're looking into the lives of Joseph, who was an ordinary, everyday human, that should give us hope that we can too. And so I ask this question, just imagine what God will do with you despite the circumstance you find yourself in. And remember that this series is about ordinary and everyday people that became heroes, that were changing the world and influencing others for God. And I think what we're going to find out in this hero series is that God has called each of us to hero status. Not so that we can have fame or fortune or be looked at, but that everyone who stepped into this relationship with Christ, there is a call of an extraordinary life through an ordinary person. And I believe that that is the biblical definition of a hero. The biblical definition of a hero is ordinary people that through God does extraordinary things. Because guess what? All the people that we're going to talk about, they are flawed and they screwed up in life, but all of them are examples of how God uses broken and imperfect people to do extraordinary things. It's all about him. It's not about your gifts or your abilities or your special powers or that you have a cape, but it's about letting Jesus be the hero of your life. And that's what I'm hoping we will find over the next series. That we will understand that it truly is, and we mention it every week for a reason, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, no matter what you are going through, that God can be the hero through you in your life and tell a heroic story. So I hope you're as excited I am about going into this series this fall, and I can't wait to see how God is going to use it. Will you pray with me? Father, I want to thank you for the stories of the heroes that have come before us. The stories that have had an incredible amount of faith in you. And that faith is that you are going to work despite the circumstances we're in. And I know that there are people here today that are listening to this that are saying, there's no way. There's no way that God is for me. There's no way that this is going to do anything good in anybody's life. But my prayer, God, is that their faith will be strengthened, that you will continue to show up into their lives and see how much you are working. Father, my prayers for each and every person that hears this, that realizes that they can do extraordinary things because you are working in their life. Apart from you, there's nothing. But with you, all things are possible. Thank you, God. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for letting us partner with you. We're excited to see how you're going to do it. And it's in Jesus' name we pray.